What you are about to read has been called forbidden, not because it was locked away in vaults or burned in bonfires. It has been called forbidden because it places full responsibility for the shape of your life directly in your hands. And most systems, most structures, most of the invisible architecture of the world you grew up in were built to keep you from believing that was true. Because a person who knows they can bend reality in their favor is extraordinarily difficult to control. They do not accept the ceiling placed above them. They do not stay in the lane assigned to them. They do not wait for permission. They understand that reality is far more responsive to the human mind than anyone officially told them. And they use that understanding to build something extraordinary from what others would call ordinary circumstances. This audiobook is the concentrated essence of that understanding drawn from ancient philosophy, modern neuroscience, quantum physics, psychology, and the lived experience of people who have genuinely changed what was possible for themselves. It gives you the actual mechanisms, not the wishful version, not the motivational poster version, the real deep specific understanding of how the mind shapes reality and what to do with that understanding every single day. Every chapter will take you further inside the architecture of the possible. If you are enjoying this audiobook and want to continue building real communication confidence, subscribe to this channel now. More chapters are coming, and each one will guide you step by step through mastering every conversation. Chapter 1. Reality is not fixed. The science most people were never taught. The version of reality you were taught in school was built to produce obedient factory workers and reliable consumers. It told you the world was solid, mechanical, and predetermined. It told you matter was the foundation of everything, and that mind was just something matter happened to do. It gave you a universe of fixed rules and fixed limits, and told you that your job was to navigate within those limits rather than to question whether the limits were real. And for the most part, you believed it. Not because you were naive, because the story was told with enormous authority in buildings designed to communicate authority by people invested in the authority of the story. But the science that was quietly happening in laboratories throughout the 20th century was telling a very different story, and most of it never made it into the classroom. Quantum physics, the study of matter and energy at the subatomic level, delivered findings that dismantled the mechanical model of reality so thoroughly that even the physicists involved spent years struggling to accept what the experiments were showing them. At the quantum level, matter is not solid. Particles exist as probability waves, meaning they occupy multiple possible states simultaneously until the moment of observation. The act of measuring a quantum particle collapses its probability wave into a specific definite state. This means in a formulation that still generates controversy, but that has been experimentally confirmed repeatedly, that the observer participates in determining what is observed. Consciousness is not a passive witness to a fixed reality. It is a participant in the construction of what becomes real. The double-slit experiment is the most famous demonstration of this participatory quality, and the one that most clearly illustrates the strangeness of quantum reality. When particles such as electrons are fired through two slits in a barrier, they create an interference pattern on the screen behind the barrier, as if each particle had somehow passed through both slits simultaneously and interfered with itself. A behavior characteristic of waves rather than particles. But when a detector is placed at the slits to observe which slit each particle passes through, the interference pattern disappears, and the particles behave as individual particles passing through one slit or the other. The simple act of looking at the presence of a measurement device changes what the particles do. The experiment has been replicated thousands of times under increasingly controlled conditions, and the finding holds. Observation changes outcome. The gap between subatomic behavior and everyday reality is genuine and important to acknowledge honestly. Quantum effects do not straightforwardly scale up to produce the kinds of reality bending that happen in science fiction. The specific mechanism by which quantum indeterminacy might influence human consciousness and behavior is an active area of research, not a settled field, and the serious literature requires considerable nuance that pop quantum presentations routinely skip. What can be said with genuine scientific support is this. The classical mechanical model of reality in which the physical world operates according to fixed laws, entirely independent of the conscious beings inhabiting it, has been fundamentally challenged by a century of quantum research. And the alternative picture in which consciousness plays some role in the nature of physical reality is the direction that frontier physics is exploring. Neuroplasticity is the mechanism through which the brain-based dimension of reality bending is scientifically unambiguous and practically applicable. The brain is not a fixed structure. It is a continuously reorganizing network that physically changes its architecture in response to what it is consistently asked to do, consistently think, and consistently attend to. This has been confirmed through structural MRI studies showing physical changes in brain tissue following sustained practice, through functional imaging showing changed activation patterns following relatively brief interventions, and through decades of research on learning, skill acquisition, and trauma recovery. The person who consistently practices thinking differently is literally rebuilding the organ through which they experience and respond to reality. The brain they have in 10 years is genuinely different from the brain they have today, and the direction of that difference is shaped by the choices being made right now. Perception is perhaps the most immediately accessible dimension of reality bending, available to every person regardless of their circumstances or resources. The perceptual world is not a faithful recording of external reality. It is a construction assembled by the brain from incomplete sensory data using prediction, prior experience, and current emotional and cognitive state to fill the enormous gaps in what the senses actually deliver. Research in perceptual psychology has established that people perceive what they expect to perceive, what they are primed to perceive, and what is relevant to their current concerns with far more reliability than they perceive what is objectively present. Two people in identical circumstances genuinely inhabit different perceptual worlds based on the filters their prior experience, current state, and dominant beliefs impose on incoming information. Changing the filters changes the world perceived. The reticular activating system, or RAS, is the neurological structure most directly responsible for the reality bending that everyone has experienced but few have understood. The RA is a network of nerve cells at the base of the brain that acts as an attention filter, determining which of the millions of bits of sensory information arriving each second actually reach conscious awareness. It operates based on what has been marked as important, goals, concerns, survival threats, and the content of dominant thoughts. This is why when you buy a new car of a particular model, you suddenly see that model everywhere. You did not notice it before. The cars were always there. The RA was not filtering them as relevant before your purchase. The decision changed what the brain allowed you to see. Every shift in what the RA filters for is a literal change in what reality appears to offer. Understanding that reality is not fixed does not mean abandoning the rigorous respect for the physical world that genuine effectiveness requires. The person who concludes from quantum physics that effort does not matter or that physical laws can be suspended through belief has misread the lesson badly. The lesson is more subtle and more useful. The relationship between mind and reality is genuinely bidirectional and genuinely significant. Meaning that the work of developing the mind, changing its patterns, expanding its perceptual filters, and building its capacity to generate the states that produce effective action is not secondary to working in the physical world. It is among the most consequential investments available. Reality is responsive. The question is what you are making it responsive to. Chapter 2. The Blueprint Problem. Why most people keep building the same life. Before a single brick is laid in the construction of a building, there is a blueprint. Every dimension, every structural decision, every material choice is determined before anything physical has begun. If the blueprint is wrong, the building will be wrong regardless of the quality of the materials or the skill of the workers. No amount of excellent execution can correct a fundamentally flawed design. Most people live this truth in their inner life without ever examining it. They keep building versions of the same life, making the same kinds of choices, generating the same kinds of outcomes, experiencing the same recurring patterns because the blueprint from which they are building has never been examined. They are skilled workers executing a design they did not consciously choose and may not even consciously know they are following. The blueprint is the collection of beliefs, assumptions, expectations, and internal programs that were installed primarily in childhood and early adolescence, when the brain was at its most neurologically plastic, and the authority of the adults in the environment was at its most absolute. These installations were not chosen. They happened through observation, through instruction, through the repeated experiences that taught the developing nervous system what was safe and what was dangerous, what was possible and what was forbidden, what kind of person you were, and what kind of life someone like you could expect. By the time most people reach adulthood, this blueprint is so thoroughly integrated that it does not feel like a set of programmed assumptions. It feels like the nature of things. Research in developmental psychology established the concept of internal working models to describe the mental representations of self and world that form through early relational experience. John Bowlby, who developed attachment theory, proposed that children develop internal models of whether they are worthy of care, whether others are trustworthy and available, and whether the world is fundamentally safe or dangerous, and that these models then operate throughout life as unconscious filters through which all subsequent experience is interpreted. A child who consistently experienced adults as unreliable develops an internal model of people as untrustworthy that then shapes their behavior in adult relationships in ways that tend to produce the relational outcomes the model predicts. The model is not a neutral prediction. It is a self-fulfilling architecture. The concept of a self-concept, the collection of beliefs a person holds about who they are, functions as a particularly powerful component of the blueprint because it has a built-in maintenance mechanism. Research by social psychologist William Swan on self-verification theory found that people actively seek out information and interactions that confirm their existing self-concept, even when that self-concept is negative. The person who believes they are not smart will discount evidence of their intelligence while amplifying evidence of their limitations. The person who believes they are fundamentally unlovable will interpret ambiguous social signals in ways that confirm the belief and will sometimes unconsciously behave in ways that produce the rejection the belief predicts. The blueprint does not just filter passively. It actively defends itself. Economic and social circumstances that are externally imposed have real effects on the range of choices available to people, and any honest discussion of reality bending must acknowledge this clearly. The child born into poverty faces genuinely different obstacles than the child born into privilege. The person who encounters systemic discrimination faces genuinely different barriers than the person who does not. These are not invented by limiting beliefs, and they are not dissolved by positive thinking alone. What the blueprint framework adds to this honest acknowledgement is the recognition that within whatever range of circumstances a person occupies, the blueprint still determines what within that range they will build. Two people in nearly identical external circumstances can produce dramatically different lives through the operation of dramatically different internal blueprints. The blueprint does not override external reality, but it shapes what a person does with the external reality they are in. Identifying your own blueprint requires a specific kind of honest archaeology, not the self-improvement questionnaire version, but the genuine examination of the actual evidence of your life. Look at the recurring patterns, the relationship dynamics that have repeated across different partners, the financial patterns that have repeated across different jobs, the professional limitations that have persisted across different organizations, the emotional experiences that arrive with the reliability of a scheduled appointment regardless of the external circumstance. These patterns are the footprints of the blueprint. They are what it produces when it runs. And the willingness to look at them honestly without the protective interpretation that always places the cause in external factors is the beginning of genuine blueprint examination. The most revealing question in blueprint archaeology is not what keeps happening to me, but what do I consistently do that produces this? The blueprint operates through behavior, through the specific choices made from within its logic that generate the recurring outcomes. The person who consistently finds themselves in relationships with emotionally unavailable partners is consistently choosing those partners and consistently staying with them, and consistently interpreting the ambiguity of early interactions in ways that allow the pattern to perpetuate. The choosing and staying and interpreting are not random behaviors. They are the expression of blueprint programming about what feels familiar, about what is possible, about what someone like them deserves. Behaviors are the blueprint in action, and changing the behaviors durably and sustainably requires working with the blueprint rather than simply resolving each individual instance. Changing the blueprint is the deepest form of reality bending available because it changes the generative source rather than any particular output. Every other change made without addressing the blueprint will be fought by the blueprint's maintenance mechanism and will tend to regress toward the blueprinted pattern over time. The person who loses weight repeatedly and regains it has not changed the internal architecture that generates the behavior patterns leading to the original weight. The person who builds successful relationships repeatedly and then sabotages them has not changed the blueprint that marks deep intimacy as unsafe. Blueprint change requires the specific combination of insight, emotional processing, and new experiential evidence that gradually updates the fundamental programming. It is the most demanding work this book will describe and the most transformative. Chapter 3, Belief as Architecture, Building a Mind that Bends Outcomes. A belief is not just a thought you happen to hold. A belief is a structural element of the reality you inhabit. It determines what you perceive, what you pursue, how you interpret what happens to you, and ultimately what your nervous system is capable of generating as output under various conditions. The research on belief and outcome is not theoretical. It is documented in medical, athletic, academic, and professional domains with a consistency that makes ignoring it intellectually difficult. The placebo effect, in which a sugar pill with no active ingredient produces genuine physiological healing in patients who believe they have received effective medicine, is not a curiosity at the margins of medical science. It is one of the most robust and most replicated findings in all of medicine, and it demonstrates directly that belief is capable of producing physical changes in the biological system. Ellen Langinger's counterclockwise study in 1979 took a group of elderly men in their 70s and 80s and had them spend a week living as if it were 20 years earlier, surrounding themselves with the music, news, and cultural references of their youth and speaking about the past in the present tense. After 1 week, blind evaluators measuring objective physical markers found that the men showed measurable improvements in posture, gait, dexterity, hearing, vision, and cognitive performance compared to a control group. The belief that they were in a context of greater vitality produced measurable physical improvements in bodies that had been declining for years. This was not wishful thinking. It was demonstrated by the mind's assessment of the situation was changing the body's physical function in real time. The Pygmalion effect, documented first in the educational research by Robert Rosenthal and Leonard Jacobson in 1968, showed that teachers' beliefs about students' potential produced measurably different student outcomes. Teachers who were told falsely that certain randomly selected students had scored highly on intelligence tests and were expected to bloom academically subsequently treated those students differently in ways so subtle they were not even aware of the treatment difference. The students who were believed in performed better on objective measures of academic achievement. The belief changed the teacher's behavior in ways that changed the student's experience in ways that changed the student's performance. The belief did not operate through magic. It operated through a complex behavioral chain that began in the mind of the believing person and ended in the real-world outcomes of someone else's life. Core limiting beliefs operate as self-sealing systems, which is what makes them so resistant to simple intellectual challenge. The structure of a self-sealing belief is circular. The belief produces behaviors that generate evidence that confirms the belief that produces behaviors in the next cycle. The person who believes they are inherently unlucky in financial matters will make financial decisions from a posture of expected failure. Will take the kinds of risks that are most likely to produce poor outcomes from that posture. Will interpret mixed outcomes through a lens that highlights the losses and minimizes the gains, and will then point to the accumulated evidence as proof that the belief was accurate all along. The belief never allowed itself to be genuinely tested because it shaped the test conditions. Challenging this system requires interrupting it at the behavioral level first before the intellectual argument can get any traction. The installation of new beliefs is more complex than the affirmation model suggests, but it is not more complex than the neuroplasticity research predicts. Beliefs are neural structures, patterns of connected neurons that fire in specific sequences when activated. They become beliefs rather than passing thoughts through the same mechanism that makes any neural pattern stronger. Repetition with emotional engagement. The belief that was installed through an emotionally charged childhood experience was not installed through a single intellectual conclusion. It was installed through repeated experience that carried emotional weight, and it is updated through the same mechanism. New experiences that genuinely contradict the existing belief held with enough genuine emotional engagement to produce lasting neural change are the material from which new beliefs are built. The intellectual understanding is the map. The lived experience is the territory. Belief auditing is the practice of systematically examining the beliefs that are actually operating in your life, as opposed to the beliefs you think you have or the beliefs you would like to have. The discrepancy between these two is often significant. People who believe consciously that they deserve success while unconsciously expecting failure will find the gap visible in the gap between their stated intentions and their actual behaviors. The audit is performed not through introspection alone, but through careful examination of behavior patterns, of the automatic responses that arise in various situations before deliberate thought can intervene, and of the language used when speaking without careful self-editing. The unconscious belief system speaks clearly in these unguarded moments, and what it says is often quite different from the beliefs the person consciously endorses. The concept of identity beliefs deserves particular attention because they carry the most structural weight in the belief system. An identity belief is a belief that begins with the phrase "I am" rather than "I believe." I am someone who struggles with money. I am not the kind of person who succeeds at creative work. I am naturally anxious. I am someone who attracts the wrong kind of relationship. These beliefs are felt as facts about the self rather than as beliefs about the self, which is what makes them so structurally powerful. They do not just predict outcomes in specific domains. They organize the entire self-concept around a particular identity, and every experience is then filtered through the question of whether it confirms or threatens that identity. The person who has decided they are a struggling person will experience evidence of success as threatening to their identity, and will often unconsciously work to restore the struggling equilibrium. Building genuinely new beliefs about identity requires a process that researchers have called behavioral evidence accumulation. The deliberate incremental gathering of real experiences that contradict the existing identity belief in ways the brain cannot easily explain away. The person who says "I am not creative" does not shift that belief through repeated affirmation of "I am creative." They shift it through creating something real and showing it to someone and doing it again and doing it again until the accumulated evidence of actual creative output makes the old identity belief simply inconsistent with the observable facts. The belief changes because the facts changed, and the facts changed because the behavior changed. And the behavior changed because someone understood clearly enough that the belief was not a description of reality, but a hypothesis that could be tested and found wrong. Chapter 4. The Power of Decisive Clarity. How Commitment Bends. Probability. There is a specific quality that distinguishes the people who achieve remarkable things from the people who merely want remarkable things. It is not talent, though talent matters. It is not even effort, though effort is required. It is a quality of decisive, committed clarity about what they are going toward that changes the entire character of how they navigate every situation. The person who knows clearly and committedly where they are going makes different micro-decisions every day from the person who vaguely wants things to be better. They interpret ambiguous situations differently. They take different risks. They form different alliances. They allocate their attention differently. And they recover from setbacks through a different mechanism. The clarity of commitment is not just a motivational state. It is a functional state that genuinely changes what the same mind produces in the same situations. Research on goal setting has been among the most applied and most practically relevant in all of motivational psychology, and the findings have been consistent for decades. Edwin Locketch and Gary Lom's extensive research on goal-setting theory found that specific challenging goals consistently produced higher performance than vague goals or easy ones. Even when the vague or easy goals produced less anxiety and more immediate comfort, the specificity appears to work through the attention system. A specific goal activates the RA to filter the environment for relevant information and opportunity in a way that a vague goal cannot. The challenge works through the arousal system. Difficulty produces the optimal level of cognitive and physiological activation that high performance requires. The most powerful form of goal formulation combines extreme specificity about what is being pursued with genuine challenge that pushes the edge of what feels currently possible. The concept of burning bridges in the pursuit of a goal is usually offered as a metaphor, but it points toward a psychological reality that research has validated. People perform differently when they cannot easily turn back than when the option to retreat remains fully available. The psychological mechanism is commitment escalation. Once a significant threshold of investment has been crossed, the mind begins to organize its resources entirely around success, because failure would now cost far more than the original investment alone. This is why public commitments consistently outperform private ones in research on behavior change. The public commitment creates a social cost for failure that the private intention does not carry. It removes the comfortable retreat option and organizes the psychology of the committed person around finding a way through rather than finding a way out. Decision itself, independent of any subsequent action, has measurable effects on cognitive and neurological function that most people have never considered. Research on post-decisional rationalization, the psychological process by which people come to believe more strongly in a decision they have made than they did before making it, suggests that the act of deciding changes something fundamental about how the decided upon option is perceived and valued. This is more than cognitive dissonance reduction. It is a genuine reorganization of attentional and evaluative processes around the committed direction, a neurological endorsement that the decided option is right, and that energy should be organized around its pursuit. The person who has genuinely decided something inhabits a different psychological reality than the person who has only vaguely intended it. The phenomenon that many people call synchronicity or luck or opportunity increases in the lives of decisively committed people through mechanisms that are both mundane and interesting. The mundane mechanism is simple. The decisively committed person notices opportunities that the uncommitted person does not notice because their RAS is tuned to the frequency of their commitment. The opportunity was always there. The committed mind could see it, and the uncommitted mind could not. The more interesting mechanism involves how other people respond to decisive clarity in someone they encounter. Decisively clear people attract collaborators, mentors, and resources that vaguely aspiring people do not attract because human beings are naturally drawn toward certainty, and toward people whose trajectory feels real, and whose commitment signals that investment in them will not be wasted. The quality of intention matters in ways that distinguish genuine decisive clarity from rigid inflexibility. The committed person holds their direction with genuine conviction, while remaining genuinely flexible about the path. They know where they are going, but they do not insist on knowing how they will get there before they begin. This combination of directional firmness and methodological flexibility is what allows decisive clarity to navigate reality's complexity without being derailed by the inevitable surprises and obstacles that every significant undertaking encounters. The person who is committed to a specific outcome in a specific way through a specific path has made a commitment that reality can easily break. The person who is committed to a direction to the essential nature of what they are pursuing has made a commitment that reality bends around rather than blocking. The relationship between clarity of commitment and what is often called the law of attraction in popular culture deserves honest examination rather than either uncritical acceptance or dismissive rejection. The mechanisms already described in attentional tuning through the raw behavioral consistency through commitment, interpersonal magnetism through decisive energy, and perceptual reorganization through clear intention are sufficient to account for a significant portion of what people experience as attraction effects. Whether deeper mechanisms involving some form of direct resonance between inner state and outer reality also operate is a genuinely open question that the current science has not settled. What is not open is that decisive clarity produces measurably and reliably different outcomes than vague wanting through mechanisms that are well understood and fully consistent with everything known about how the mind works. Developing decisive clarity as a practice requires the specific courage to choose one thing fully enough that the alternatives genuinely recede. Most people keep all doors open because closing a door feels like loss, and they do not fully go through the door they have chosen because they have not fully closed the others. The result is a life lived in the vestibule close to many possible rooms but fully inhabiting none. The practice of decisive clarity demands the willingness to name specifically what you are building, to commit to it publicly enough to create genuine accountability, to organize your daily choices around it consistently enough that the commitment becomes visible in the pattern of your life, and to accept that real commitment produces real loss of the alternatives. The loss is not the cost of commitment. It is the proof of it. Chapter 5. The Subconscious Mind. Accessing the greater power below the level of conscious thought operating continuously and processing an estimated 11 million bits of information per second, compared to the 40 bits the conscious mind handles, is the subconscious mind. It is running your body without your awareness, managing the complex regulation of systems ranging from immune function to hormonal balance to postural control. It is storing and organizing memory, including the vast majority of your memories that are not currently in conscious awareness. It is processing the emotional significance of your experiences and filing them according to a categorization system built from your entire accumulated history. And it is generating the vast majority of the impulses, preferences, fears, desires, and intuitions that the conscious mind then either endorses or overrides. The conscious mind is the spotlight. The subconscious is the stage, the director, and most of the audience. The relationship between the conscious and subconscious minds is not the relationship between reason and irrationality, as older psychological models sometimes framed it. It is more accurately the relationship between explicit processing, the deliberate, slow, effortful thinking that requires conscious attention, and implicit processing, the fast, automatic, pattern recognition-based processing that operates below the threshold of awareness. Both systems are intelligent. Both serve essential functions. The problem arises not from having both systems, but from the cases in which the implicit system is running programs that were installed by experience rather than chosen by deliberate decision, and that are no longer serving the person's genuine interests. The subconscious is loyal to the programming, not to the programmer's well-being. The most practically significant feature of the subconscious for the purposes of reality bending is its inability to distinguish between vividly imagined events and physically experienced ones in terms of the neural and emotional encoding it produces. This is the same principle that underlies the therapeutic use of visualization in trauma treatment. The effectiveness of mental rehearsal in athletic performance, and the reality-shaping practice of deliberate visualization in the morning and evening periods of semi-consciousness between waking and sleep. In these hypnagogic and hypnopic states, the boundary between conscious and subconscious processing is at its thinnest, and the material that is consistently introduced into awareness during these periods is processed by the subconscious with a depth and durability that daytime visualization does not always match. Hypnosis is the deliberate induction of a state of heightened subconscious accessibility, and the research on its effects provides some of the clearest evidence available for the subconscious mind's capacity to alter physical function. Clinical hypnosis has been demonstrated to produce genuine anesthesia for surgical procedures, to accelerate wound healing, to reduce the intensity of chronic pain, to resolve conditions that had not responded to conventional treatment, and to produce changes in immune markers. Research by Tad James and others on hypnosis and health consistently found results that cannot be explained by suggestion alone, because the effects include objective physiological changes that the subject could not consciously produce at will. The subconscious, when accessible, and when given the right kind of instruction, can alter the body in ways the conscious mind cannot directly command. The period of falling asleep and waking up are among the most powerful subconscious programming windows available in ordinary life, and they are almost universally misused. The typical habit of consuming stimulating or distressing content before sleep, or of spending the first waking moments in anxious processing of the day ahead, is filling these high-access windows with exactly the content that produces the most entrenched and most unhelpful subconscious programming. Research on the hypnagogic and hypnopic states confirms that the mind is in a state of decreased critical faculty and increased suggestibility during these transitions. The content of thought and imagination in these windows is processed with less filtering and more depth than the same content processed during full waking consciousness. Deliberately choosing what occupies these periods is one of the highest leveraged subconscious programming opportunities available. Symbolic and imaginal language is the native language of the subconscious mind, which is one reason that approaches using imagery, metaphor, story, and symbol tend to produce deeper and more lasting changes than purely verbal logical approaches. When working with deep patterns, the subconscious processes images and symbols with extraordinary speed and depth. It processes logical propositions far less naturally. This is why dreams which are produced by subconscious processing during sleep communicate in symbol and image rather than in argument. It is why the great mythological and religious traditions communicated their deepest teachings through story and symbol rather than through philosophical treatise. And it is why the visualization practices in this book work better when they engage the full sensory and symbolic imagination rather than us simply rehearsing logical conclusions. Repetition is the primary mechanism through which the subconscious is programmed and reprogrammed. But the quality of the repetition matters as much as the frequency. Repetition without emotional engagement is the least effective form. Repetition with genuine emotional engagement, the kind that produces the neurological events associated with real experience rather than with dry rehearsal, is the form that actually updates the subconscious architecture. The most effective subconscious reprogramming combines the timing advantage of hypnagogic states with emotionally engaged visualization of desired realities held consistently over weeks and months. This is not a quick fix. It is a genuine neurological rebuilding project, but it produces changes that the conscious mind's repeated resolutions and affirmations applied without these conditions simply cannot match. The relationship between the subconscious and what is sometimes called intuition reveals another dimension of the subconscious's reality-bending role. The intuition that tells you something is wrong before you can articulate why that points you toward an opportunity. Your conscious analysis had not yet identified that generates the creative solution. After the deliberate mind has run out of approaches, is the subconscious mind operating on the full information processing power of 11 million bits per second. Research by Gary Klein on expert intuition found that experienced decision-makers in high-stakes domains made most of their best decisions through pattern-matching processes that bypassed deliberate analysis. The subconscious, trained through years of relevant experience, was seeing things the conscious analysis was missing. Working with the subconscious rather than against it, which begins with respecting and cultivating its inputs rather than dismissing them as irrational, is working with the greater part of your own intelligence. Chapter 6. Emotional Alchemy. Turning difficulty into direction. The alchemists of medieval Europe were engaged in what looked to outsiders like the eccentric pursuit of turning base metals into gold. The real alchemy they were describing, hidden in the symbolic language of their laboratory work, was the transformation of the base material of human experience. Pain, loss, failure, anger, fear into the refined gold of wisdom, resilience, direction, and power. This inner alchemy is not a metaphor in the dismissive sense. It describes a real process with real psychological and neurological mechanisms, and the people who have mastered it have access to a quality of human power that the people who remain inside their pain without transforming it never develop. Difficulty does not automatically produce growth. Difficulty metabolized through conscious alchemy produces growth. The first step in emotional alchemy is radical permission, the full unresisted allowance of whatever the emotional experience actually is. Most people's first response to a difficult emotion is some form of management, suppression, explanation, or escape. The sadness is immediately followed by reasons. The sadness is not justified. The anger is immediately followed by apologies for its existence. The fear is immediately followed by attempts to think it away. All of these management strategies interrupt the natural metabolic arc of the emotion. Research on emotional processing found that emotions that are given full permission to be felt move through the system in a much shorter time than emotions that are consistently interrupted and resisted. The permission is not weakness. It is the most efficient pathway through the information layer of each emotion, is what the alchemical process is working to extract. Every difficult emotion carries specific information that the person experiencing it needs. Fear carries information about perceived threat, which may require either action to address a genuine danger or examination to identify an imagined one. Grief carries information about what was genuinely valued, and loss, which is itself a clarification of values that ordinary circumstances do not always produce. Anger carries information about violated boundaries or unmet needs that need to be acknowledged and addressed. Shame carries information about the gap between current behavior and the person's own values, which is often the most useful form of feedback available. The extraction of this information requires sitting with the emotion long enough to hear what it is saying rather than immediately trying to silence it. The transformational move in emotional alchemy is the question that converts the experience from a wound into a direction. The question is not why is this happening to me, which maintains the victim position. The question is what is this showing me that I need to know. The shift in framing is small, but its effects are enormous. The first question focuses attention backward on the cause of the suffering. The second focuses attention forward on the information the suffering is carrying. Research on post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon in which significant adversity produces genuine positive development, found that the people who experience growth following trauma were almost universally people who found a way to ask questions like the second one about their experience. The event was the same. The question determined whether it was primarily a wound or primarily a teacher. The concept of the emotional ledge is useful for understanding where the most powerful alchemy happens. The emotional edge is the quality of experience just at the boundary of what you can currently tolerate without shutting down or being overwhelmed. It is the place where the discomfort is real, but the capacity to be present with it is intact. Just beyond the edge is the zone of overwhelm, where the nervous system shuts down protective processes and genuine integration becomes impossible. Just inside the edge is the zone of comfort, where nothing is actually being challenged. The most productive emotional alchemy work happens at the edge, which is why genuine therapy, genuine growth-oriented relationships, and genuine creative work all produce some degree of discomfort. The discomfort is the signal that the edge has been found. Anger is one of the most energetically powerful emotions available and one of the most consistently mishandled, both by people who suppress it entirely and by people who express it destructively. The alchemical approach to anger begins with recognizing it as fuel rather than as a problem to be eliminated. Research on anger and motivation found that anger properly channeled is among the strongest available motivators for sustained action in the direction of meaningful goals. The civil rights movement, the environmental movement, and virtually every significant social transformation in human history has been fueled in substantial part by the anger of people who found a constructive direction for genuine moral outrage rather than either suppressing it or expressing it destructively. Your anger about something real is information about your values. The alchemy is in finding the direction it is pointing. Failure is the emotional experience that the conventional success culture handles worst because the conventional success culture treats failure as the opposite of success, rather than as a necessary component of it. Research on the learning trajectories of highly successful people found that most had experienced significantly more failure than their less successful peers, not despite their success, but as a contributing mechanism to it. Thomas Edison's famous framing of his thousands of unsuccessful attempts at the light bulb as finding thousands of ways that did not work is not just motivational mythology. It describes the epistemological reality of learning. Failure provides specific information that success does not, and the person who can metabolize failure as information is building knowledge faster than the person who succeeds on early attempts and learns only what works. The long arc of emotional alchemy produces something that is difficult to describe without sounding either mystical or trite, but that people who have genuinely moved through significant difficulty describe with remarkable consistency. It is a quality of depth of having been to places in oneself that comfort never reaches and of having come back from those places with something that was not available before. It is the specific kind of compassion that is only available to the person who has genuinely suffered and genuinely survived. It is the particular kind of wisdom that cannot be learned from books and that cannot be transmitted through instruction, but only through the lived experience of having met difficult things and found a way through them. The alchemy is real. The gold it produces is real, and access to it runs through the very experiences that most people spend their lives trying to avoid. Chapter 7. The frequency of certainty, acting before you have proof. The most consequential quality that sets apart the people who shape their reality from the people who merely react to it is not confidence in the conventional sense. It is not the absence of doubt or the presence of bravado. It is something more specific. The ability to act from a certainty about direction that precedes the evidence that would ordinarily justify that certainty. This sounds like it is describing irrationality, and in the framework of conventional risk management, it partially is. But in the framework of reality bending, it is the mechanism through which outcomes that were genuinely improbable become genuinely real. The certainty precedes the evidence because the certainty is one of the conditions required to produce the evidence. You act as if, and in acting as if, you create the conditions from which the thing becomes actual. William James, one of the founders of American psychology, described what he called the will to believe in a famous essay written in the 1890s. His argument was that in certain specific conditions, the act of believing something to be true is itself a necessary precondition for that thing becoming true. The person who believes they will make friends at the party behaves in ways that produce friendship. The person who believes they will not behaves in ways that produce isolation. The belief is not justified by prior evidence in either case. It is a bet on one version of the future over another, and the bet changes the probability of the outcome, because the bet changes the behavior and the behavior changes the social environment, and the changed social environment changes the result. Belief in these conditions is not a passive observation of reality. It is a creative act. The concept of acting as if is distinct from lying to yourself or performing a confidence you do not feel. Lying to yourself about where you currently are produces the specific cognitive dissonance that undermines the strategy from the inside. Acting as if is different. It is choosing to embody the state and behavior of the version of yourself who has already achieved the direction you are committed to. Not because you have deceived yourself about your current position, but because you understand that the behavior of that version is available to you now, and that practicing it now is the fastest route to the outcome it produces. The distinction is between faking a destination and choosing a direction. And the difference in the psychological experience of the two is palpable. Research on behavioral embodiment across multiple domains consistently shows that changing behavior to match a desired state often precedes and produces the corresponding inner state rather than following it. Athletes who practice with the physical and mental form of high performance develop that form more rapidly than athletes who wait until they feel ready to perform at that level. Students who adopt the study behaviors of high performers before they believe themselves capable of academic excellence begin producing academic results that then justify and reinforce the belief. The behavior leads, the inner state follows, and the outcome then provides the evidence that transforms the chosen certainty into earned certainty. The sequence is the opposite of what most people expect. The specific fear that prevents most people from accessing the frequency of certainty is the fear of being wrong. The person who acts with certainty and fails is in a more exposed position than the person who acts cautiously and fails, because the certain person is seen by themselves, and sometimes by others, as having overestimated themselves. This fear is not irrational. Public failure is genuinely more costly in many social environments than quiet failure, but the cost calculation changes dramatically when the alternative is considered. The person who never acts from certainty never creates the conditions from which the outcomes certainty produces become possible. The cautious person who waits for sufficient evidence before committing is waiting for evidence that will never arrive in the required form, because some of the required evidence is created by the commitment itself. The body is a faster route to the frequency of certainty than the mind. The mind generates arguments, evaluates evidence, and constructs justifications. The body either holds the physical posture and breath and movement quality of certainty, or it does not. Research on embodied cognition demonstrated repeatedly that physical states precede and shape mental states rather than simply expressing them. The person who deliberately adopts the specific physical characteristics of confident certainty, the upright spine, the open chest, the deliberate unhurried movement, the full breath, the steady gaze, begins to experience the internal states associated with those physical configurations within minutes of adopting them. The certainty becomes more genuinely available from the changed physical state than it was from the contracted, uncertain one. The body is not pretending. It is practicing, and the practice builds the genuine state. The relationship between the frequency of certainty and other people's responses is one of the most directly observable manifestations of the reality-bending principle in action. People respond to decisively certain energy in ways that are measurably different from how they respond to uncertain, hedging, or desperately seeking energy. They trust it more readily. They invest in it more willingly. They offer their best contributions to it more generously. They open doors for it that they keep closed for energy that communicates ambivalence about its own direction. None of this is a performance game. It is the social electromagnetic reality. The frequency you broadcast determines which doors open and which remain closed. Not because the world is rewarding confidence as a virtue, but because the world's social systems are genuinely organized around coherence and certainty as signals of competence and trustworthiness. Building the genuine frequency of certainty as a sustained operating state rather than an occasional peak experience requires the same patient incremental approach that builds any genuine capacity, beginning with small domains where genuine certainty is more accessible. Doing what works to anchor the physical and mental states associated with it, gradually extending the practice to higher stakes domains as the frequency becomes more familiar and available. Each genuine experience of acting from certainty and finding that the world responds differently than it would have to hesitation adds to the evidence base that makes the next act of certainty slightly more natural. The frequency does not stay elevated from a single decision. It is built from the accumulation of practiced acts of deliberate orientation toward what you are building rather than toward what you fear. Chapter 8. The Mirror Principle. Your outer world reflects your inner convictions. Walk through your life right now and look carefully at what you see. The quality of your closest relationships, the character of the professional environment you inhabit, the financial reality that is present, the health and vitality or their absence in your body, the quality of the daily experience, the predominant tone of what it feels like to be you living your life. Now sit with an uncomfortable question. What inner conviction would have to be operating to produce this outer reality as a natural result? Not as a judgment of yourself, as a diagnostic inquiry. Because the outer reality is not randomly assigned. It is the mirror of a set of inner convictions that are operating with enough consistency and enough depth to produce it as their characteristic output. The mirror is always showing you something true. The mirror principle is not the same as the claim that everything that happens to you is your fault or that external forces and circumstances do not exist. They exist. Poverty is real. Injustice is real. Illness is real. Random events occur. The mirror principle operates within these realities, not above them. What it addresses is the layer of patterned experience that persists across different external circumstances. The relationship difficulties that follow you from one partner to the next. The professional ceiling that appears in different organizations. The financial pattern that recurs regardless of which strategy is applied. These persistent patterns are the mirror. They are showing you the inner convictions that are generating them consistently enough to override the variation in external conditions. Research on projection in psychology provides the mechanism underlying the mirror principle at the level of interpersonal perception. Projection is the process by which a person perceives in others the qualities, intentions, and characteristics that actually belong to their own inner world, often qualities they are not consciously aware of. The person who consistently perceives others as judgmental is usually carrying significant self-judgment that they are projecting outward. The person who consistently perceives others as unreliable is often carrying deep inner conviction about their own reliability that they are externalizing. The projected qualities are real in the perceiver, not fabricated, which is why the perception feels genuinely accurate. The problem is not in the seeing, but in the source. What is being seen in the mirror is the seer's own face. The financial mirror is one of the most concrete and most immediately available for examination, because money follows a trackable pattern across time that most other life dimensions do not. Examining your financial history with genuine curiosity rather than with shame or resignation reveals a pattern that is remarkably consistent across different income levels, different strategies, and different economic periods. The person whose financial pattern consistently produces just enough and no more regardless of income fluctuations is expressing an inner conviction about the appropriate amount through their financial behavior. The person whose financial pattern consistently produces difficulty regardless of how much comes in is expressing inner convictions about money that deserve direct examination. The income is the input. The pattern is the mirror. What it is reflecting is available to be read if the reading is done without the protective interpretations that prevent honest examination. Relationships are the most emotionally charged mirror available, and the most difficult to see clearly precisely, because the emotional charge interferes with the clarity of the reflection. But the consistency of relationship patterns across different people and different contexts is one of the most reliable forms of evidence available for reading inner conviction. The person who attracts emotionally unavailable partners consistently enough that the pattern holds across very different types of people in very different life periods is not simply unlucky in their choices. They are expressing through their choices an inner conviction about what is available to them in intimacy, what is normal in relationships, or what is safe in closeness. The mirror is not the individual partner who is unavailable. The mirror is the pattern of consistently choosing and staying with unavailability, regardless of the surface differences between the specific instances. Changing what the mirror shows requires changing what is being reflected, which means changing the inner conviction rather than manipulating the outer circumstances. This is the insight that distinguishes genuine inner work from the endless pursuit of better external situations in the hope that the right external situation will finally produce the desired inner reality. The person who leaves one relationship that mirrors unavailability and immediately enters another that mirrors the same thing has not addressed the mirror source. The person who changes jobs to escape a dynamic that mirrors their inner conviction about authority will encounter the same dynamic in the new job wearing different faces. The mirror changes when the conviction changes, and the conviction changes through the specific combination of conscious examination, emotional processing, and new behavioral practice that genuinely updates the deep programming. The practice of working with the mirror requires developing what might be called interpretive courage. The willingness to sit with an uncomfortable outer reality and ask what it might be reflecting about an inner reality rather than immediately looking for external explanations. Not as an exercise in self-blame, which is itself a distortion that prevents genuine learning, but as a genuine inquiry into the relationship between what is being held inside and what is being produced outside. The inquiry is most productive when held with genuine curiosity, rather than judgment, with the understanding that whatever inner conviction is producing the mirrored reality was almost certainly installed in reasonable response to circumstances that no longer exist. The conviction is not a character flaw. It is a survival strategy that has outlived its usefulness. Seeing it clearly is the beginning of choosing something different. The ultimate value of the mirror principle is not in the diagnosis it enables, but in the direction it implies. If the outer world is reflecting the inner conviction, then the most direct path to a genuinely different outer world runs through a genuinely different inner conviction. Not through better strategies or harder work or luckier circumstances, though all of these have their place. Through the actual genuine sustained inner work of examining and updating the convictions that are generating the current mirror. This is demanding work. It requires the specific courage to look honestly at what is being reflected and to own rather than externalize what the reflection reveals. But the return on that courage is proportional to its difficulty. A genuinely different inner conviction eventually produces a genuinely different outer world, and no other approach can produce that result with the same depth and durability. Chapter 9. Time Mastery. How Compressed Focus Bends. What's possible? Time is the one resource that every human being has in identical quantities. 24 hours per day, 7 days per week. The billionaire and the struggling student inhabit the same 24 hours. And yet some people produce in those 24 hours what others produce in years, while others circle in those same hours for decades without meaningful accumulation. The difference is not energy or intelligence, though both contribute. The difference is in the quality of engagement with time, the degree to which the available hours are genuinely used rather than partially filled, the degree to which the attention deployed in those hours is genuinely focused rather than partially divided. and the degree to which the work being done in those hours compounds rather than restarting from scratch. Time mastery is not about doing more. It is about doing the specific right things with a quality of attention that makes each hour worth several ordinary ones. The research on focused work and its relationship to performance and output is among the most practically significant in cognitive psychology. Cal Newport's synthesis of this research introduced the concept of deep work. The specific quality of cognitively demanding, distraction-free, fully engaged work that produces the high-value outputs that most knowledge work is ultimately about. His analysis found that the capacity for deep work is simultaneously becoming more valuable in the modern economy, and more rare because the same technologies that are producing the modern economy's most valuable opportunities are also systematically destroying the attentional habits required to access them. The person who develops genuine capacity for sustained deep focus has access to outputs that the perpetually distracted person cannot produce regardless of raw intelligence or available time. Anders Ericsson's research on expert performance, which identified deliberate practice as the primary mechanism through which elite performance is developed across virtually every domain studied, has specific implications for how time should be structured. Deliberate practice, the type of focused, goal-directed, feedback-rich practice that produces genuine improvement rather than simple repetition of existing capability, is psychologically demanding in a specific way that limits how much of it can be productively done in a single day. Ericsson found that even the most dedicated experts in his studies rarely exceeded 4 hours of genuine deliberate practice per day. More than 4 hours of genuine deliberate practice produced diminishing returns or psychological fatigue that reduce the quality of subsequent practice. The implication is that the question is not how many hours you put in, but how many of those hours are genuinely at the level of quality that produces real development. The Paro principle, the observation that roughly 80% of outputs in many systems come from 20% of inputs, has been validated across enough domains to function as a reliable heuristic for management. In professional contexts, roughly 20% of activities produce roughly 80% of meaningful results. In learning contexts, 20% of the material accounts for roughly 80% of applicability. In relationship contexts, 20% of social investments produce roughly 80% of genuine connection and support. The person who has genuinely identified their 20% and structured their highest quality time around it is playing a fundamentally different game than the person who treats all activities as roughly equivalent and allocates time primarily based on urgency rather than importance. The practice of time blocking at the level of creative and cognitive work deserves more specific attention than it typically receives in productivity literature, because the specific sequencing of different types of cognitive work across the day has measurable effects on the quality of output at each stage. Research on cognitive performance rhythms found that most people have a 2 to 4 hour window of peak cognitive performance in the morning, when the prefrontal cortex is freshest, and the neurochemical environment most supportive of the kind of focused analytical and creative work that produces the most significant outputs. Using this window for administrative tasks, meetings and email while saving the most demanding, creative and strategic work for the afternoon when the peak has passed, is the standard operating mode for most knowledge workers, and is a significant misalignment of peak capacity and high-value demand. Single tasking is one of the most powerful performance-enhancing behavioral changes available, and one that runs most directly against the current culture's glorification of multitasking as a sign of capability and productivity. Research on multitasking and cognitive performance found repeatedly that multitasking does not produce the parallel processing it appears to. It produces rapid sequential task switching, each switch carrying a switching cost of several minutes of recovery time as the brain reorganizes its processing resources around the new task. Heavy multitaskers in research studies performed worse on every measure of cognitive performance tested, including the tasks they thought they were multitasking most effectively. The person who does one thing at a time with genuine full attention produces more output of higher quality in less subjective time than the person who does many things simultaneously with divided attention. The relationship between urgency and importance in time decisions is one of the most consequential distinctions in any serious discussion of time mastery. The urgent but unimportant tasks that fill most professional days. The emails requiring immediate response. The minor decisions requiring immediate input. The recurring low-stakes administrative demands generate a sense of busy productivity, while consuming the time and attentional resources that the important but non-urgent tasks. The strategic thinking, the deep creative work, the relationship investment, the skill development require. Dwight Eisenhower's matrix for organizing tasks by urgency and importance remains one of the most practically useful frameworks for this distinction. The person who consistently chooses important and non-urgent over urgent and unimportant is building something that compounds, while the person who responds primarily to urgency is managing the urgent queue indefinitely without building. The philosophy of time that underlies genuine time mastery is not the philosophy of squeezing maximum productivity out of every available minute. That approach produces the specific form of exhaustion that arrives when time has been maximally filled, but not well spent. The philosophy is one of genuine stewardship, understanding that the time available is finite and irreplaceable, that what is done with it is the material from which the life is built, and that the quality of that building deserves the same kind of deliberate attention and genuine prioritization that any genuinely important project deserves. Time mastery in this sense is not a productivity hack. It is a form of respect for the only resource that cannot be recovered once spent. Chapter 10. The field of possibility. Living beyond inherited limits. Every person is born into a specific field of what is considered possible. The family they are born into has a specific relationship with possibility shaped by its economic situation, its cultural context, its collective history of success and failure, and the stories it tells about what people like them can expect from life. The community they grow up in has its own field, its ceiling of aspiration, its map of what ambitions are appropriate for someone from this place. And the broader cultural context has its own field, its system of narratives about which kinds of lives are genuinely available and which exist only in fairy tales or for other categories of people. These fields are not explicitly taught. They are absorbed through the accumulated texture of thousands of daily observations, conversations, and experiences that gradually make certain possibilities feel natural and others feel preposterous. The inherited field of possibility operates primarily through what sociologist Pierre Burr called the habitus. The set of dispositions, expectations, and ways of being that are acquired through immersion in a particular social environment, and that then produce behavior consistent with that environment, without requiring conscious deliberation. The habitus of a person raised in an environment of scarcity and limitation produces behavior, and perception consistent with scarcity and limitation that persist even when the person has moved into entirely different external circumstances. The dispositions travel with the person because they were not installed as external rules to be followed, but as internal orientations toward the world that feel like the natural character of the person, rather than like the learned expectations of their origin environment. Research on first-generation college students provided compelling evidence of how the inherited field of possibility shapes outcomes independently of capability. First-generation students who were academically equivalent to continuing generation students consistently underperformed relative to their measured ability, reported higher levels of imposter syndrome, sought fewer help-seeking resources, and were more likely to leave before completion. The differences could not be explained by preparation or intelligence. They were explained by the cultural field. First-generation students did not have the habituated sense of belonging in academic environments that continuing generation students carried, and the absence of that sense produced behaviors and psychological states that undermined their performance despite their genuine capability. The field was shaping the outcome without anyone intending it to. Expanding the inherited field of possibility requires exposure to evidence that what is possible is genuinely larger than what the inherited field contained. This is the mechanism through which mentorship and models work, not primarily through the information or advice they provide, but through the simple reality of their existence as proof of what is possible. The first person from a particular background to enter a particular domain does not just create an opportunity for themselves. They create a proof of concept for everyone who shares their background and is watching. The field of possibility expands. The people who follow carry a different relationship with possibility because the proof exists that the ceiling was false. Deliberate field expansion is the practice of intentionally seeking out evidence that what you want is genuinely possible for someone in your specific circumstances, not for people in general, not for people with advantages you do not have. For people who started from a position similar to yours. This search is not about finding exceptional cases that prove possibility in theory. It is about finding patterns, about discovering that the thing you want is not a miracle that happened to one unusually gifted or fortunately positioned person, but a repeatable outcome that has been produced by ordinary people with ordinary resources through specific and learnable approaches. Each genuine instance of this evidence adds to the field of possibility in a way that is felt neurologically rather than just understood intellectually. The specific practice of seeking and engaging with people who live at a larger field of possibility than the one you inherited is one of the most direct and most practically powerful ways to expand your own field. The conversation with someone who inhabits a larger sense of what is possible is a neurological event. The mirror neurons fire. The nervous system registers the reality of their field, and the felt sense of possibility is genuinely altered by the contact in ways that reading about the same person in a biography does not fully replicate. This is why proximity to excellence in any domain is consistently cited as a primary factor in the development of excellence by practitioners across fields. The proximity is not just inspirational, it is field-altering. The resistance to field expansion is worth examining honestly because it is real, and it is not irrational. The field of possibility defines not just what is achievable but what belongs, what is appropriate, what kind of person you are. Expanding it means leaving behind to some degree the identity organized around the original field. The person who exceeds the aspirational ceiling of their community may find that the community responds with suspicion, resentment, or the specific kind of subtle discouragement that comes from people who feel implicitly criticized by someone else's expansion. The cost is real, and it is paid in belonging, in familiar identity, in the comfort of knowing exactly where you fit. The question is not whether the cost is real, but whether it is worth paying, and only the person paying it can answer that. Living beyond inherited limits is ultimately not the project of rejecting where you came from, or of proving something to anyone who doubted you. It is the project of living as fully as possible within the actual scope of what is genuinely available, uncontracted by the specific limitations that your particular starting field imposed. The full scope of what is available to a human being is considerably larger than what any particular starting field suggests, because every starting field reflects not the limits of human possibility, but the limits of the specific circumstances from which those fields were constructed. The person who genuinely expands beyond their inherited field is not violating anything true. They are discovering that what was presented as the ceiling was always the floor of something larger. Chapter 11. The Practice of Manifestation, where strategy meets surrender. The word manifestation has accumulated so much cultural baggage that it has become almost impossible to use without immediately triggering either enthusiastic credit or equally enthusiastic dismissal. Both reactions miss the genuine phenomenon that the word is pointing at, stripped of the magical thinking that popular culture has layered over it. Genuine manifestation is neither magic nor simple positive thinking. It is the specific set of conditions, internal and external, that must be in place for a desired outcome to become actual, and the deliberate practice of creating and maintaining those conditions. Understanding manifestation at this level requires holding both genuine rigor about what is actually happening and genuine openness to the parts that remain mysterious and not yet fully mapped by science. The well-mapped dimensions of manifestation begin with clarity. The specific, concrete, emotionally engaged definition of what is being moved toward. Research on goal specificity and outcome demonstrates consistently that vague aspirations produce vague results, while specific, detailed, emotionally meaningful goals produce specific engagement of the intentional, motivational, and behavioral systems that generate real outcomes. The manifestation process begins with the kind of radical clarity that most people substitute vague hopping for. The kind of clarity that knows not just what is wanted, but why it is wanted, what it will genuinely feel like to have it, and what specifically is being committed to in its pursuit. The specificity is not a detail of the practice. It is the foundational act that makes everything else possible. Visualization, as a component of manifestation, works through the neurological mechanism of motor imagery and neural simulation, rather than through mystical resonance with the universe. When you vividly imagine a desired scenario with full sensory and emotional engagement, you activate the neural circuits associated with that scenario in ways that overlap significantly with actual experience. Repeated activation strengthens those circuits. Stronger circuits are more available for actual execution. The athlete who has visualized 1,000 perfect performances before the crucial one has actually performed it 1,000 times at the level of neural activation, and the neural substrate of the performance is more robustly developed than it would be from physical practice alone. The visualization is not decorating a wish with vivid detail. It is training the neural systems that will execute the desired outcome. Action is the component of manifestation that distinguishes it from fantasy. And it must be the kind of action that is both specific and responsive. Specific action toward the clearly defined goal taken consistently, even when immediate feedback is not available, is the behavior that actually moves things in the physical world in the direction of the desired outcome. Responsive action is the willingness to adapt the specific actions based on what is actually happening, rather than insisting on a predetermined path, regardless of what the path is showing. The combination of specific and responsive action is what distinguishes the person who is genuinely building something from the person who is either rigidly executing a plan or reactively responding to circumstances without a clear direction. The surrender dimension of genuine manifestation is the element that most goal achievement frameworks leave out, and the most manifestation frameworks overemphasize in ways that produce passivity rather than genuine release. Genuine surrender in the manifestation context is the release of the anxious, grasping relationship with the outcome, not the abandonment of the outcome as a direction. It is the difference between I'm walking confidently toward a destination and desperately running toward it while repeatedly looking back to check whether it is receding. Research on motivation and performance found that the people who performed best in goal pursuit were those who held their goals with high commitment but low anxiety, who cared deeply about the direction, while remaining genuinely functional when the path was unclear or when setbacks appeared. The surrender is what maintains that psychological stance. Timing is a dimension of manifestation that sits at the intersection of strategy and mystery. There are genuine cycles in the natural world, in economic systems, in social dynamics, in the biological rhythms of the individual human that create genuine variation when particular kinds of action are most productive. Acting with the grain of relevant cycles is not superstition. It is the intelligent reading of context that genuine timing requires. But the timing dimension of manifestation extends into territory that is less fully mapped. The experience that many practitioners report of certain moments having a specific quality of readiness of the sense that something is about to shift, and that the right action now will produce different results than the same action would have produced earlier. This timing sensitivity may involve pattern recognition operating below conscious awareness. It may involve something else. The honest answer is that the full mechanism is not yet understood. The integration of strategy and surrender in the practice of manifestation requires a specific kind of dual awareness, clear enough in your direction and committed enough in your action that you are genuinely building something real while loose enough in your relationship with the specific outcome that you can respond to what is actually unfolding rather than forcing what was planned. The paradox is real but livable. You must care enough to act with genuine commitment, and you must release enough to allow the outcome to take the form it actually needs to take rather than the form you have predetermined. The committed direction is yours to hold. The specific form of the outcome is negotiated with reality. The best outcomes almost always arrive in forms that were not exactly what was planned, but that were genuinely better than what was planned for reasons that become obvious only after the fact. The practice of daily manifestation work requires both the explicit practices, the visualization, the declaration of intention, the deliberate emotional alignment with the desired state, and the implicit cultivation of the underlying conditions that make everything else possible. The implicit cultivation is the ongoing work of clearing the limiting beliefs that would prevent the desired outcome of maintaining the physical and psychological health that supports effective action, of building and tending the relationships that provide the context in which outcomes become possible, and of developing the genuine capability that makes the desired outcomes deliverable rather than merely desired. The explicit practices are the navigation. The implicit cultivation is the vehicle. Both are required and neither alone is sufficient. Chapter 12. The Life Architect's Living as a Deliberate Creator. At the end of this journey through the architecture of reality bending, a specific kind of person comes into focus. Not a superhum, not someone exempt from difficulty or immune to loss or beyond the reach of genuine uncertainty, but someone who moves through the same world everyone else inhabits with a fundamentally different relationship to it. They understand at a level that has become genuinely operational rather than merely intellectual that the life they are living is not simply what happened to them. It is the current output of a complex interaction between external circumstances and internal architecture. And the internal architecture is not fixed. It can be examined. It can be updated. It can be deliberately redesigned. They are in the deepest sense of the phrase architects of their own experience. The distinguishing quality of the life architect is not the absence of problems. They have problems. Some of them have serious ones. What is different is how the problems are held and worked with. The life architect holds a problem as a puzzle to be engaged rather than as evidence of their fundamental inadequacy. They work on it with the same quality of engaged curiosity they bring to the other dimensions of their lives. They do not spiral from a specific problem into a global indictment of their entire situation or their own worth. The problem is specific. The response is specific. The engagement is intelligent. And the outcome of the engagement becomes part of the evidence base from which the next challenge is approached. Problems in the life of the deliberate creator become the friction that produces growth rather than the proof that growth was always impossible. The relationship with failure changes completely in the life of someone who understands the reality-bending principles. Failure stops being the opposite of success and becomes genuinely, and not just rhetorically, a dimension of the process. The specific information that failure provides is information that success cannot offer. And the person who can extract that information and apply it accelerates development in ways that the person who either fears failure too much to risk it or who takes failure as a final verdict cannot access. The life architect has a specific relationship with their own failures. They are examined with genuine curiosity mined for genuine learning, and then released from the identity-confirming role that a different relationship with failure would give them. The failure happened. The lesson is extracted. The direction continues. Genuine creative power in a life is not the power to control all outcomes. No one has that. It is the power to consistently influence the direction of outcomes through the quality of the internal architecture being brought to each situation. The person who has developed strong beliefs aligned with their genuine values. A subconscious program toward their genuine goals. Emotional mastery that allows difficult experiences to be processed rather than accumulated. Decisive clarity about their direction. And genuine time mastery that puts their best cognitive hours in service of their highest priorities is bringing a quality of creative power to their life that produces genuinely different results from what the same circumstances would produce for someone without that development. The power is real. The mechanism is real. The work required to build it is real. The community of deliberate creators deserves specific attention because no one bends reality alone. Every significant creative achievement in human history has involved a web of relationships, mentorships, collaborations, and supportive communities that provided resources, perspective, accountability, and the specific social environment in which the creating person could function at their highest level. The life architect who attempts to build without community is working with a fraction of the available creative power. The relationships in which genuine support, genuine challenge, and genuine witnessing of the work are all present are among the most powerful tools available. And deliberately building and tending those relationships is not a secondary consideration in the project of deliberate creation. It is a primary resource. The question of purpose, of what the bending of reality is ultimately in service of, is the question that distinguishes life architects from people who have simply learned sophisticated self-improvement techniques. The person who bends reality in service of their own comfort, status, or security is building something. But it is not the kind of building that produces the specific quality of aliveness that genuine purposeful creation produces. The life architects who have most deeply inhabited the principles described in this book have almost universally moved through the practice from a primary orientation toward getting what they want toward a primary orientation toward contributing something genuinely useful to the world. This shift is not a sacrifice of personal fulfillment. It is its deepest expression because the specific satisfaction of contributing something real is not available through any other means. The world that greets you on the other side of genuinely adopting the life architect orientation is not a world without suffering or without genuine limitation. It is a world in which suffering and limitation are navigated differently with more agency, with more skill in extracting meaning, from difficulty with more capacity for both the bold, decisive action and the patient, surrendered waiting that different moments require with more genuine connection to the people around you. Because the person who has done genuine inner work is genuinely more available for real relationship than the person who is managing their inner life, rather than living from it with more creativity. Because the mind that is not spending its resources on managing suppressed material and defending inherited limitations has more available for actual creation. The world does not change. The person in it does. Go back to your life with everything this book has placed in your hands, not the abstract knowledge of it which was available from the first page, but the practiced embodiment of it which only becomes available through the doing. Begin with the blueprint examination with the honest inventory of what inner architecture is currently producing what outer reality. Move from there to the specific belief structures that the blueprint is built from and begin the patient, real, experiential work of updating them. Develop the subconscious practices that work with the greater power rather than against it. Master the emotional alchemy that turns difficulty into direction. Build the decisive clarity that changes what probability you are navigating. And do all of it in the company of people who are attempting the same project. Because the work is real, and the work is long, and the work is genuinely worth doing, and it is far better done together than alone.